My name is Dalton Caldwell. I'm a partner at Y Combinator. Um, Undergrad degree from Stanford, symbolic systems and psychology. I started my first company in November of 2003. So I've been out here to see quite a bit of stuff happen. Yeah, the company was called iMeme, which was a music streaming service, which got to be pretty large. I think at peak we had 26 million registered users. We saw right about the same number of monthly unique visits to our website. And we had this streaming music widget that was really popular at MySpace, which definitely dates it, right? But it was really popular. And so through the widget, we reached over 100 million uniques a month. So I think we served music to about 1% of everyone on the internet, at peak in like 2007. So that was that was quite a ride. Took a company from where I was in my studio apartment in Palo Alto, and just like coding all the time, to having 100 employees and raising a bunch of money for it, and doing all sorts of things wrong, honestly, and getting some things right. So that was quite a ride. And then after that, I started another company called Mixed Media Labs, and we made a few different products with that. Um, um, and most recently, the product that was made with that was app.net, and that's what we worked on before I joined YC as a partner. Yeah, I mean, I started meeting with YC companies when PG used to send them to me, and I realize in retrospect now that that was part of them vetting me / recruiting me. But I got kind of used to meeting them and trying to help them with their problems. And the way I approach companies, and the way I've seen the best investors approach companies, is as an entrepreneur to an entrepreneur, and not as an investor. Like if I think back to the investors I've had over the years myself, the people that I wanted to work with the most, the ones that actually added the most value, were people that have been sitting in the seat that I've been sitting in, and that understand why it's hard. They understand the challenges, and so the advice they give is very much along the lines of, "Here's what I would do if it were me," right? And that's like the core of any advice that I would give someone. It's not like, "Well, let me tell you what you should do." I just try to put myself literally in their shoes, try to imagine being them, and facing all the things they're facing, and then be like, "Well, here's what I would do." and again, sometimes that's wrong, but I think that the way I think about advising startups and investing is still very much from the perspective of being an entrepreneur myself, rather than thinking of like that I don't think this is a finance job. I think this is an advisorship job, and a lot of the best investors I've ever worked with tend to follow a similar pattern. Yeah, yeah. I think that the most important thing, and this will sound obvious, but clarity. You would be shocked how few pitches are sensible and coherent, right? Like this seems like, oh wait, that's really, but seriously, like if someone is able to tell a coherent story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, explain what their product is, who wants it, what it does, just that will get you in a top percentage of companies. And sometimes it's hard. This is why it helps to be technical. Like I'm pretty technical. I wrote a lot of code. I still write a little bit of code. That sometimes when someone talks about technical stuff, it all sounds like jargon anyway. But if you know the technical stuff, you can definitely tease out the um, the contentless jargon versus the actual, like, let me explain what my product does, and it just happens to be fairly technical. And that, yeah, like the very first thing I think I look for in a pitch is like, can I explain this in plain words that anyone can understand? And that I really think that if there's any pitch that you cannot explain in plain words, it's a really bad sign. And I forget which physicist, I think maybe in Feynman or something, but someone said something along this, like, if there's any science that exists that you can't explain in plain language to someone, maybe you have to break down some of the concepts. But if it's literally unexplainable, there's a good chance it's bullshit. And so that's kind of how I feel about startups as well.
So what are some of the things that founders usually botch? Like where does clarity get muddled?
Two things. One, it gets muddled in their own mind, where no one has like pushed them of their peers or themselves to make something simple. So they're correctly explaining to you their thoughts. It's just their thoughts are inherently muddled, and so that's a big problem. And the only way to get better at that is to, like, I guess, get mentored and to try to go do a muddled thing and see how that works. Like you're going to struggle, right? If your ideas are muddled and your explanation is muddled, it's likely that whatever you actually build will be very hard to explain. The other thing is that maybe the founder has a really good idea of what it is that isn't muddled, but they think that it's impressive when they talk to investors to sound muddled and to throw in lots of needlessly complicated things to make themselves sound more important or smarter, or I don't know. Like for some reason, obfuscation, some folks think is a good way to sound credible. And the exact opposite is true. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting. So there's kind of this clarity piece of just being able to understand what it is that they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's some correlation between founders who are able to be very clear and concise about what they're building and, ability to execute. Is that?
I think that's right. I think communication is a skill that people underappreciate in their perception of what Silicon Valley is like and what tech is like. But think about how much, when you're a founder, you need to be good at communicating. It's not just to investors. It's to your co-founders, right? What causes companies to not work? A lot of times it's co-founder disputes. So being really good at communicating with your co-founder is important. Being able to communicate with the press is really important, to be able to explain what your vision is. Being able to communicate with your employees. Being able to convince someone to join your company, right? Like that's a pretty big, when you're very early stage, it's a big ask and there's a lot of job opportunities available. So how are you as a founder going to convince this great person to join your company? It's communication. And so all of these different facets of what makes a great founder, I would argue that communication is a big part of that. And that if you struggle to be able to communicate with people, I think that it'll make it much harder to be successful.
Cool. So, you hear thousands of pitches. You also go through hundreds of interviews.
Yeah.
So like as you're going into an interview, like what's your mindset? Like how are you kind of approaching the conversation you're about to have? Like put us in the shoes of yourself as you're walking into an interview.
I try to, with everyone, have as neutral of a state of mind as possible. Like I'll like take deep breaths and I'll try not to like let the previous one affect my state of mind. Even if it was good or bad, I try to like reset myself. And what I try to do is I try to get excited about whatever they're talking about, right? Like usually a good interview or a good pitch, you start off like open-minded, and then if the founder is able to tell a good story and they're able to present a narrative that makes sense, you go with them wherever they're going to go, right? And if you follow yourself falling into the story and like not looking at the time, or not like if all of a sudden everything falls away and you're going with them on the story, just like a good movie or something, right? That's a good pitch. And if on the other hand, they immediately say things that don't make sense, or some other thing happens that causes you to get distracted, or to think about other things, or think about what's for lunch, or like think about how many minutes are left in the interview, that's a bad sign. And it's often the case of like poor communication styles. And so anyway, so I try to get excited so that I want to fall in love with every pitch, and I want to get excited about what they have to say. I think that sometimes folks overcoach themselves and they think of this as a way to sound impressive. Like, remember I was talking about the jargon thing a minute ago. They'll throw out lots of jargon. They'll try to appear as not who they really are and put on a facade of, I don't even know how to describe it, but like what they think they're supposed to act like, not how they really are. And that's definitely botching it, because like they're not comfortable, right? So you can very clearly see when you're communicating with someone when they are not comfortable and when they're not. And everyone's nervous, but there's an okay way to be nervous, right? And if you're passionate about your idea, you should still be able to explain it pretty well. And so that happens. And then sometimes this is a good thing for communication skills in general. It's that they get off track, right? So if you're talking with anyone and you're trying to tell them a story about your company, or tell them any kind of story, and you end up in the weeds talking about some tangent and can never bring it back to the main topic, that's a bad sign. So sometimes with interviews, founders will get stuck on some tangent and we won't even really talk about the company. And that's something that people sometimes watch.